In surfing terms, a backside turn means that your back is facing the wave, and a frontside turn means that your chest is facing the wave. So as a goofy-footed rider, my right leg is forward, so that means that if I'm coming up this way, this is a backside turn, and then if I'm coming up this way, this is a frontside turn. And for me, frontside turns are much harder than backside turns, and so I've really struggled with them as I've been learning surf skate bull riding. So this year I've been focusing really hard on those frontside turns. And while I wouldn't say that I've mastered them by any means, I have discovered a few tips that will at least put you on a path to mastery. So in this tutorial, I'll give you 5 tips for mastering frontside turns in the bowl. So as I've been focusing on my frontside turns and watching a lot of film, the first thing that I noticed is that on my backside turns, as I come up this wall, I will lean pretty far horizontally coming off that wall. But as I was watching film, I noticed that on my frontside turns coming up, I don't lean on that wall this way nearly as much, and that really limits your ability to get up high on that wall. The big reason why frontside turns are harder to lean into is because on backside turns, you're leaning forward and so you can see everything in front of you. But on those frontside turns, you're leaning backwards and you can't see what's behind you, so it's really scary. So what was happening for me is that as I would come up under these frontside turns, I was kind of freezing up out of that fear, which meant that I wasn't leaning back, which meant that I'm kind of standing up. And that means that you can't lift your knees high enough to come around that turn and get up high on that wall. So watch what happens when you don't lean horizontally on that wall and you stay standing up as you're coming through that frontside turn. Now watch what happens when you lean back more and see how much higher you can get up on the wall. The next thing I noticed in my frontside practice is that it's a lot easier to bend your knees during the final compression stage of backside turns than it is those frontside turns. And the reason for that is because on backside turns, when I'm facing forward, I have the ability to lean forward with my hips, which helps that compression. But on my front side turns, I can't bend my hips backwards, and so I'm only able to bend my hips. That means that I have to use my hips for that full compression stage as I'm pulling up through that front side turn. So what you have to do is really exaggerate those knee bends as you're coming through the top of that front side turn. So as you're coming up that wall, you want to come up here, and then as soon as you hit that wall, you're going to lift those knees up into your chest as high as possible. And then you're going to I call it kind of folding into my body. As you come around that turn, I will kind of compress or fold into my body, and that's me trying to lift my knees up as high as possible, because the higher you can get your knees up on those front side turns, the higher up on that wall you can get. The next thing I noticed in my practice is that I wasn't getting as much speed going into my front side turns as my backside turns. And that was because as I was approaching that wall, I'm kind of freezing up in anticipation of that. And so I'm just not maintaining that speed coming into that turn. So when you're coming into that front side turn, your brain will trick you and make you think that you can kind of manage your speed better by going slower. But the truth is that the faster you're going, the easier it is to make that turn. So to master your front side turns, it's really, really important that you keep up your speed. Now, to maximize your speed in the bowl, there's 2 areas to focus. There's technique, and then there's your equipment, specifically your wheels and bearings. And I'm going to say which one you should focus on first depends on what level of rider you're at. So if you're just beginning bull riding, then you probably ought to just focus on technique first. But if you're more of an intermediate rider and you haven't upgraded your wheels and bearings yet, then you're going to be shocked by how much of a difference that makes to your speed. So if you're going to be a serious bull rider, you absolutely eventually at some point need to upgrade your wheels and bearings. And if you want some recommendations for those, I've left some links in the video description below. And as far as improving your technique goes, well, I'm going to point you to the tutorial you'll see in the link above, as well as the tips in this video. And then from there, it's just a matter of practice. This tip may or may not apply to you depending on what level you're at, but one secret for me in unlocking frontside turns has been to practice in stages. And what I mean by that is to start on something really simple like this 45-degree angle and just practice those frontside turns over and over again until you feel really comfortable with it. Next, move up to a half pipe like this and just practice over and over again until you feel comfortable. Then find yourself like a half pipe or a scenario like you see here where you can just go back and forth on two walls and practice them over and over again. And with that, now you're ready to take those frontside turns into the bowl. If you're under the age of 40, this final tip may not apply to you. But if you're like me and you're over the age of 40, then you would not believe how much strength and endurance it takes to do surf skate bull riding. And I've had to work really hard on building my strength for those frontside turns specifically. And that's because when you're coming up on those frontside turns, you're going to feel it a lot in that leading hip and thigh. And so this is kind of the area for me as a goofy-footed rider with my right leg forward. This is all of the area for me that's been really hard to build because you have to basically kind of lift everything up like that. So building strength for me has been a combination of two things. First of all, it's just skating. I go to the park every morning and I skate for about an hour. And then right after I skate, I go to my yoga studio. But instead of doing yoga classes, I actually will do kettlebells, TRX, and Pilates classes. And out of all of those, Pilates is incredible for bull riding. So you'll have to do whatever your lifestyle and schedule allows, but I can promise you that if you want to master those frontside turns, you're really gonna have to build your strength. And I would highly recommend Pilates or anything that really focuses on core strength. So I hope you found these 5 tips helpful as you're trying to master frontside turns in the bowl. Now come take a ride with me.